So, Deanna, in July of 2021, and I remember reading this, the Washington Post published an article with the headline, Many Black Women Felt Relieved to Work from Home During COVID, Free from Microaggressions. And so, to build on what Mia is saying, talk a little bit about what those microaggressions are and how workplace contributes to them or can alleviate them.
Sure. So I think microaggressions can be exactly what they say, micro, or they can be macro, right? Um, Prior to starting my own business, I worked in healthcare, so in large healthcare systems, and in just describing some of the microaggressions and what I heard, because I interviewed, part of my job was in systemic racism for a large healthcare system. So I interviewed a lot of our staff, and you heard everything from, getting in elevators and people grabbing their pocketbooks to not being spoken to in the hallway to patients throwing urine on them and saying, I don't want this black so and so in my room, or speak English. We speak English here. So microaggressions ran the gamut. And exactly as Mia said, it's about the weathering, the cortisol levels and the health outcomes that result. And so that's why so many Black women felt, or women or women of color in general felt relieved, not having to go into the workplace. And because I think if we were to have done a study, we would see that health outcomes improved. And because it's weathering, right? It's the continued fight or flight, and the toll it takes on our body that leads to all of the things we talked about in the earlier panel, heart disease and so many things. I think as far as policies, you have to think about anti-harassment policies that are put in place and how effective those are. But beyond a policy, what are the procedures for following the policy? I mean, policies are just policies until they are enacted, and whether they are followed every time. And what's the process for reporting them? Can you report them anonymously? What's the sanctions that come out of them? So all of that you have to think about in a workplace. And so at Fair Works, and when I'm working with other clients, we really think about what is the policy, what are the procedures that are followed? Is it followed every time? Because sometimes bias seeps in, and it may be followed on the front lines, but maybe not followed in the C-suite. So it's all of that. So those are some of the policies that we really think about. Feedback loops, procedures, other HR procedures such as 360 evaluations with management, management training, bias trainings. But what is a piece of an ongoing continuum, and not just a bias training today and then doing nothing else? Because actually that's been found to be ineffective and actually increases bias when you have mandatory bias trainings, and nothing else surrounding them. So it's all of those things, making sure you have a comprehensive strategy to eradicate.
Mia, I want to at least get this question in because I thought it was so fascinating. When a few years ago, after the Dobbs decision came down in June of 2022, I hosted a webinar about the unintended consequences. We called it aftershocks of that of that decision. Yet I thought we had explored all of them, but the one that you brought up was really fascinating to me. We know that a lot of employers, the minute that happened, announced that they were going to either pay for transportation or somehow support individuals if they were in states that did not allow abortion. And then, and they got it really into the fray, if you will. And I know that we talked about in our webinar a little bit, but it was still kind of new. What were those unintended consequences once those state decisions were made and and it became reality for those employers?
Yeah. Well, I think the bottom line for many employers, is it can't just be the bottom line. right? Especially when you're talking about private companies. Having to really take care in a new state, and by state I mean boundless, a boundless political state. Having to take care of one's employees is paramount, right? Because it has everything to do with whether or not the company will thrive. And by thrive, I don't mean just, again, not just the bottom line, but thrive in terms of leadership, thrive in terms of reputability, and so forth, and being on the cutting edge, being innovative. And so I think, especially, and not even just after Dobbs, but even during COVID, we saw a lot of companies coming out and speaking out against racial violence, speaking out against police brutality in ways that I think were unprecedented in the 21st century, and centuries before then, where civil rights was activated. But now I think, with Dobbs in particular, you have this phenomena of employers reacting to judicial decisions and to legislative policies at the intersection of women's health. And perhaps, to your point, there are companies that didn't make public statements similar to what they may have done in 2020 against other really very hard conversations that were impacting their employees, right? They didn't say openly where they stood, but perhaps they made very swift determinations, internal determinations associated with company retention and recruitment. To harken back to some of the things that Deanna mentioned, perhaps there were supplemental benefits provided for family planning services sought across state lines, right? Packages for extended caregiver benefits for, again, that sandwich generation that she mentioned of, parents parenting their children and parents parenting their parents, but not only just for new and burgeoning families, families who are giving birth, to children, but perhaps you saw employers who were extending packages for employees who were looking to parent children who are already on this earth, or for families experiencing transitions, again, related to intergenerational supports. I recently saw this video it was probably on Instagram, about a community in Oregon, which is unique, but I know that there are others that are like this, that focus on elderly care, right? So it's an independent living space that is intergenerational on purpose, and where they bring in persons who are widowed, persons who maybe they are Medicaid or Medicare beneficiaries, and a part of living there is also living amongst families who foster children or who recently adopted children. And I thought to myself, this is such an innovative and necessary, and frankly, really not a new concept globally, but certainly in the United States is novel. Perhaps employers could invest in something like this, or health associations or institutions can really look into novel ways to attend to the needs that are new for our nation, because our needs are changing. Our demographics are shifting. We're becoming a browner society. We're becoming an older society. And we're becoming a society where, again, most of the almost half and half the workers are men to women. So what does that mean in terms of, to use your terminology earlier, Mitzi, unintended consequences? We have yet to really see, but I know that our needs for this century will completely look different, and the innovations necessary are going to be along social lines, not just technological lines. They're going to be along employee lines, and not just with respect to workforce management as we know it. So we've come so far, and yet we have not, and we've got to continue moving forward by innovatively addressing the issues that women need in the workforce and beyond.